I was 23 minutes into a mission that should have taken 10. We were pinned down, radios hissing with broken transmission, dust filling the air so thick it tasted like metal. The guys around me were losing their grip. I could see it in their eyes, the widening pupils, the frantic breathing, the small, frantic gestures that told me their minds were slipping into panic. And right there, in that chaos, I learned the truth behind this title you clicked on, How to Stay Laser Focused When Everyone Else Quits. I didn't learn it from a book. I learned it on a night when losing focus meant someone wasn't going home. People think focus is about trying harder. They think it's talent, a gift, something certain people are born with. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Your brain is wired to abandon you the moment pressure rises. It goes into overload, shuts down options, narrows your vision, and tells you, quit, retreat, you're done. And if you listen to that voice for even a second, it becomes reality. According to a Navy cognitive performance study, the human brain overestimates danger under stress by more than double, meaning most people quit not because they're actually at their limit, but because their brain lies to them. That night, I felt that lie trying to take over, a ringing in my ears, a tightening in my chest, a whisper saying, this is too much. Fear wants you to freeze, to hesitate, and hesitation kills. I knew that. But the fear still comes. It always comes, even to us, even to me. The difference is what you do in the next 5 seconds. Here's the part most people get wrong. They try to fight fear with bravado. They try to outthink it, outmuscle it, or pretend it isn't there. That never works. That's the mistake I've watched hundreds of candidates make in Bud S. They try to push through panic using raw willpower, and when that fails, they convince themselves quitting is logical, survival-based, reasonable, but quitting always feels reasonable in the moment. That's the trap. So what actually works? The system we used that night, one I've carried with me ever since. Step 1, evaluate the danger without emotion. I scanned the terrain, found 2 cover points, calculated distances, and made the decision that kept us moving. That's the first solution. Break the problem into pieces small enough for your brain to process. Fear hates clarity. But the real trick, the part nobody sees, is what I did before all of that. A tiny mental snap-back ritual. A controlled breath through my nose, a 4-second hold, and a slow release. That one breath interrupts the panic spiral long enough for logic to come back online. It's the same trick I teach CEOs, athletes, and anyone who lives with high-stakes pressure. Not a pep talk, not a motivational speech. A physiological interruption. Because focus isn't natural, it's trained, built through repetition, sharpened in discomfort. And when everyone else's mind was breaking that night, mine didn't, because I had practiced the art of bringing my attention back to the present moment again and again, long before the mission even began. You need to understand this. Anxiety spikes are predictable. Your brain will always try to save energy by quitting early. But when you create a system, when you know the danger, apply a solution, avoid the common mistake, and use the secret trick that actually works, your focus becomes unbreakable. That night didn't make me special. It made me aware that the only reason I stayed sharp when the world collapsed around me was because focus isn't something you feel. It's something you do, especially when every voice in your head is telling you to stop. Most people think the biggest threat to their focus is something dramatic, a crisis, a setback, or a moment of overwhelming pressure. But the real enemy is much quieter. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It slips in between your thoughts, steals tiny pieces of your attention, and convinces you nothing is wrong. I call it the invisible enemy. Not gunfire, not chaos, mental noise. In the teams, we used to say the mind is either a weapon or a weakness. And today, for most people, it's a weakness, not because they're lazy, but because the world has learned how to hijack their attention better than any battlefield ever could. The modern battlefield lives in your pocket. Every vibration, every notification, every meaningless swipe nudges your brain toward the dopamine loop, those tiny hits of stimulation that feel good for a second and ruin your focus for hours. People underestimate how dangerous that is. You scroll for 30 seconds, but your brain stays scattered for 20 minutes. You check your phone just once, but your mental clarity fractures. It's death by 1,000 micro distractions. And here's the part most people never hear. Distraction changes your physiology. It drains your willpower, your testosterone, your decision-making strength. Your body treats distraction the same way it treats stress, by burning through your mental energy reserves. I saw this in teammates who were rock solid on missions but crumbled during downtime because they never learned to control their mental input. And I see it today in civilians who want discipline but try to develop it in an environment designed to destroy it. Researchers at Stanford found that multitasking reduces cognitive control, lowers working memory, and increases stress hormones even when you feel like you're being productive. You're not. You're scattering your mind so thin that it never has enough energy to stay focused on what matters. And when your brain is tired, your ambition becomes optional, your goals feel heavy, and your discipline collapses. I've never seen someone fail because they lacked talent. They fail because they lose the mental bandwidth to stay engaged when it counts. This is where the danger comes in. Distraction sabotages long term goals long before you realize what's happening. It makes you feel busy while actually weakening your ability to commit. It turns ambition into anxiety. It convinces you that you're making progress while keeping you stuck in the same loop. That's the first half of the trap. The second half is even worse. You think you can beat it with willpower. Most people try to white knuckle their way through distraction. They grit their teeth, try harder, or tell themselves they'll just be more disciplined next time. That's the biggest mistake. Willpower is a terrible strategy. It burns out fast, and once it does, you're back in the dopamine loop before you even realize you've fallen into it. I saw this play out in Bud S. Candidates who relied on willpower broke first. The ones who survived built systems that protected their mind. So, what's the way out? You interrupt the enemy at the source. You control your inputs before they control you. You decide when your mind can be accessed, not the world. And the simplest, most reliable tool I ever learned for that is the same one I used on missions: the 5-second reset ritual. It was designed to snap the mind out of overload and bring it back into clarity instantly. I still use it every day. 5 seconds to shut down the noise, 5 seconds to reclaim control, 5 seconds to reset your entire mental state. That tiny ritual is the difference between being pulled around by distractions and directing your focus like a laser. It's not glamorous, it's not complicated, it's not motivational, it's operational. And if you don't fight the invisible enemy, it wins every time. There's a moment in every difficult task, physical, mental, emotional, when your brain begins to scream louder than your body. It tells you you're done, you've hit the wall, you've reached the limit. It whispers that any further effort is reckless, dangerous, pointless, and most people believe that voice. They treat it like truth. But here's the hard reality that most never learn. When that voice shows up, you're not at 100%. You're not even close. You're at around 40% of what you're actually capable of. That means 60% of your potential never even gets touched. Your brain quits long before your body or your ability does. I learned that the brutal way in Bud S during a conditioning drill that seemed designed to break people in half. We were waist deep in cold surf, boots filling with water, lungs burning, shoulders shaking from exertion we had no business sustaining. One guy next to me started mumbling that he couldn't feel his arms. Another said his legs were locking up. People were peeling off left and right, tapping out because their mind convinced them they were finished. But I could see the truth. They weren't physically done. They were mentally collapsing. I felt my own mind doing the same thing, telling me my body was shutting down, that another rep or another sprint was impossible. But here's the strange part. When I pushed just a little further, just past the point where my brain told me to stop, I realized I had more in me. A lot more. My body didn't fail. The fatigue vanished. And suddenly the boundary that felt final dissolved. That was the day I started to understand the 40% rule long before I had language for it. It wasn't inspiration. It wasn't toughness. It was simply the moment I saw the brain's greatest flaw. It overprotects you. A Harvard resilience study suggests the brain overestimates fatigue signals to keep you safe, not to tell you the truth. It's like a built-in alarm system that goes off early, long before real danger arrives. Most people interpret that alarm as a stop sign, but it's actually a threshold, an invitation to step into the part of yourself that almost no one reaches. This is where hope enters the picture, because once you understand that your limits are mostly self-imposed, you unlock something close to superhuman focus. You stop negotiating with the brain's lies. You stop believing the first wave of fear or exhaustion. And when you no longer instantly respond to those signals, your performance, your discipline skyrockets. You tap into a reserve that most people never discover. But here's the mistake people make. They try to bulldoze through that 40% wall using motivation. They think they need to feel fired up or inspired. They try to outshout the fear or overpower fatigue, and that always fails. You can't beat a survival mechanism with emotion, so they quit convinced they truly hit the limit, not realizing it was just the first checkpoint. The solution is to bypass the brain's initial stop signal using a controlled cognitive override. The trick I used in Bud S, and the same one I use to this day, is simple. When your mind says you're done, commit to 5 more seconds or 5 more reps or 5 more breaths, something small, measurable, and immediate. That micro extension pulls you past the false limit and forces the brain to recalibrate. Suddenly, the panic signal dims, strength returns, focus sharpens, and you realize you weren't anywhere near the real edge. When most people quit at 40%, they think they're saving themselves. What they're really doing is surrendering to a lie. But once you learn to push through that psychological decoy, you discover the version of yourself that doesn't break when the world tells you to stop. That's the advantage that carried me through Bud S, through missions, and through everything I've done since. It's not the absence of limits. It's the refusal to trust the first limit your brain throws at you. I remember the exact morning it happened. Cold air biting our faces, the sand already sticking to our uniforms, the instructors standing there with clipboards like judges deciding who would make it and who would fold. It was the kind of day you could feel in your bones before anything even started. We all knew what was coming. We just didn't know who it would take out. By the end of that day, 70% of the class quit. Not over injury, not over exhaustion, over the emotional storm inside their own heads. It always starts the same way. You're standing in line, the sun's still low, and your mind begins whispering predictions. How long will this go? What if I can't keep up? What if today is the day I break? Those little questions grow teeth. For some guys, the fear becomes so loud that every exercise, every sprint, every order feels like proof they're not good enough. And once your emotions start steering the wheel, your performance falls apart. Emotional decision-making is the silent killer of discipline. It doesn't snap you in half. It slowly dissolves your confidence until quitting feels like the only logical option. I watched some of the strongest, most physically gifted men I'd ever met drop out before we even hit the halfway mark. Not because they lacked strength, but because they couldn't control the story in their head. They let their identity be shaped by whatever they were feeling in the moment. Fear, frustration, panic, doubt. And if your identity shifts with every emotion, you can't build resilience. That day taught me something I never forgot. You don't survive Bud S by being motivated. You survive by deciding who the hell you are before things get hard. I made that decision long before that morning. I told myself, I'm the guy who does not quit. Not I hope I don't quit, not I'll try my best, but a clear, unshakable identity. That identity became the anchor I held on to when my legs burned, when my lungs screamed, when the instructors pushed us past what any normal person would call reasonable. And here's the important part. You can train that same identity no matter where you are in life. Your discipline is not built from big motivational moments. It's built from the small private decisions you make when no one's watching. Sports psychologists discovered that micro goals increase persistence because they shrink overwhelming tasks into manageable, winnable steps. That's exactly what I did that day. While everyone else looked at the next 6 hours, I looked at the next 60 seconds. I didn't run the whole drill in my mind, I just ran the next rep. Micro goals create momentum, and momentum protects you from emotional collapse. When you break the problem down small enough, fear loses its grip, but most people sabotage themselves by waiting to feel ready. That's the biggest mistake. If I had waited to feel ready that day, I would have rung the bell before breakfast. Readiness is a myth. If you give your brain the option to hesitate, it will take it. The guys who quit weren't weak. They paused long enough to let doubt take root, and doubt grows fast. The trick that saved me, the one I still use today, is something I call the calm under chaos cue word. Every SEAL has one. It's a single word or phrase you say to yourself that snaps your mind back into clarity the moment panic begins. Mine was simple: lock in. Whenever I felt overwhelm rising, I whispered it under my breath. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough for my brain to recognize the command. That cue word cut through emotion and pulled me back into control faster than anything else. It was the difference between spiraling and stabilizing. By the end of that brutal day, the majority of the class was gone. But I was still standing, not because I was stronger, but because I refused to let my emotions make decisions for me. I anchored myself to an identity, used micro goals to stay present, and triggered my cue word whenever chaos tried to take over. If you want to rise above average discipline, if you want to be the one who keeps going when everyone else quits, you need to build the same internal system. Decide who you are. Act in the next 60 seconds. Don't wait for readiness. And create the word that snaps your mind back into focus when the world starts closing in. That's how you push past the breaking point. I still remember the exact sound the bell made that morning. Sharp, metallic, final. It cut through the cold air like a knife. One moment, we were all standing in formation, shivering, tired, trying to guess what fresh hell the instructors had prepared for us. And then, within the first hour, men started dropping out, one by one, then in pairs, then in waves. Before noon, 70% of the class had quit. Not because the instructors broke their bodies, but because something inside them snapped. The breaking point isn't physical, it's emotional, and that morning was proof. The fear didn't start with the drills, it started long before, in the quiet moments, right when your mind has time to imagine everything that could go wrong. I watched faces tighten as the instructors shouted the day's schedule. Guys weren't reacting to the tasks in front of them. They were reacting to the tasks they assumed were coming. Their minds were living 10 hours ahead, predicting pain, predicting failure, predicting humiliation. Emotional decision-making is poison in an environment like that. It turns a manageable day into an impossible one. And once fear takes the wheel, logic disappears. You could see the internal battle in their eyes. Some looked down, some stared off, some started talking themselves out of staying. You can hear a man quit before he ever speaks a word. His breathing changes, his shoulders slump, his gaze breaks. That's when the instructors step in, not to push harder, but to observe. They know the body can go farther, but the mind can't if it's already surrendered. I felt the fear too. I'm not immune to it. My legs were sore from the day before. My hands were raw. My stomach was tight. Every part of me wanted to project the whole day forward and ask, can I survive this? And that's the trap. When you evaluate your strength based on the next 12 hours, no human is strong enough. That's why I didn't do that. I didn't look 12 hours ahead. I looked 60 seconds ahead. Sports psychologists discovered that micro goals increase persistence because they interrupt emotional overwhelm. And that's exactly what saved me. I told myself, just get through this evolution, just get through this drill, just get to the next breath. I wasn't trying to survive the day. I was trying to survive the moment, and moments are winnable. Whole days are not. But the real difference between me and the guys who quit wasn't willpower. It wasn't toughness. It wasn't motivation. It was identity. Before Bud S ever began, I made a decision. I am not the guy who quits. Not, I hope I won't quit. Not, I'll try not to quit, but a permanent identity set in stone before the suffering even started. When that identity is locked in, emotions lose their power. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop asking whether you feel like continuing. Identity isn't based on mood, it's based on who you've decided to be. The mistake most people make, the mistake that knocks them out before they even start, is waiting to feel ready. They wait for confidence, for courage, for the right headspace. That morning, the guys who quit were all waiting for a surge of motivation to carry them through. They never got it, and they won't in civilian life either. Readiness is a myth. If you give your mind the option to hesitate, it will choose the easy path every time, and that path leads straight to the bell. What kept me in the fight, what kept me stepping forward while everyone else stepped back, was something I still use today. A simple phrase I whispered to myself whenever I felt panic rising, my personal calm under chaos cue word. For me, it was lock in. Those two words were a switch. The moment I said them, my breathing slowed, my awareness narrowed, and the emotional noise faded. It was like clearing smoke from a room. You suddenly see again, you think again, you choose again. That little phrase saved me more times than I can count. By the end of the day, the beach was covered in discarded helmets. Men who had spent months preparing for this moment walked away, convinced they had reached their limit, but they hadn't. They hit the emotional wall and mistook it for a real one. The only reason I didn't join them is because I made decisions with identity, not emotion, with micro goals, not fear, with a cue word, not chaos. And if you learn to apply those same principles, if you stop relying on motivation, stop waiting to feel ready, and give your mind a command strong enough to cut through panic, you'll discover you can endure far more than you ever imagined. You'll become the person who keeps going when everyone else quits. When I left the teams and stepped into civilian life, I thought the battles were over. No more missions, no more midnight calls, no more moments where focus decided life or death. But I was wrong. The battlefield just changed shape. It moved into boardrooms, living rooms, gyms, and phone screens. The threats weren't explosions or gunfire anymore. They were distractions, obligations, and the never-ending pull of things that don't matter. And I learned something I never expected. If you don't control your focus out here, someone else will. A boss, an algorithm, a crisis, a bad habit, something will claim your attention and steer your life without your permission. I watch people every day being pulled into mental firefights they never chose. They're overwhelmed at work, drifting through workouts, half present in their relationships, constantly switching between tasks without finishing any. They don't realize they're losing, not because they lack intelligence or ambition, but because they go into each day unfocused and unarmed. If you approached a SEAL mission with that level of mental fragmentation, you wouldn't last an hour. Yet civilians live that way for years, wondering why they feel stuck. The hopeful part is this. The same tools that kept me alive overseas are the same tools that can help you dominate your daily life. Focus isn't a gift given to a select few, it's a skill, and it can be trained just like strength or endurance. You can build what I call limitless concentration, and it starts with something small. A neuroscience lab in Germany found that tiny daily cognitive challenges, things that take less than 2 minutes, begin rewiring the brain's focus pathways. That means you don't need a massive habit overhaul or a grueling routine. You just need one micro drill done consistently. The danger people fall into is believing they'll suddenly become focused when life calms down or motivation rises. That never happens. Busy people stay busy. Unfocused people stay unfocused. If you wait for perfect conditions, you'll be waiting your whole life. And that's the trap. Letting your environment decide your attention, letting urgency dictate your actions, letting stress choose your priorities. I've seen that destroy careers, break marriages, kill fitness goals, and leave people wondering why they can't get ahead. That's the A of the cycle, the danger. The solution is simpler than anyone wants to believe. You build concentration by shrinking the world until you can control it. I tell people to pick one micro drill they commit to every day, something that forces the mind to narrow its attention. It could be a 60-second breathing ritual, a 1-minute cold rinse, writing a single clear objective for the day, or doing a tiny physical challenge before you touch your phone. The drill doesn't matter as much as the consistency. When you do that one drill, you're training your brain to obey your command, not your impulses. That's the B, taking control of your inputs and building clarity through repetition. Here's the mistake, the C. Most people think they need a complex productivity system, 10 habits, or a perfect morning routine. They overcomplicate focus into something academic. But complexity kills discipline. When something feels heavy or intricate, you stop doing it. The people who fail don't fail because the system doesn't work. They fail because they make the system too big. And then there's the secret, the D. The one technique I teach every CEO, athlete, creator, and parent who comes to me asking how to stay focused when life is chaos. I tell them to apply what I learned on deployment, 1 square meter. Focus only on the world directly in front of you. Not the whole project, not the whole day, not the whole problem, just the next meter of life you can actually control. You'd be shocked at how powerful you become when you stop trying to solve tomorrow and begin dominating the moment right in front of you. That's how battlefield focus becomes civilian clarity. One micro drill, 1 square meter, one controlled choice at a time. You do that for 1 week, your anxiety drops. You do it for 1 month, your discipline sharpens. You do it for 1 year, and you become unrecognizable in the best way possible. And if you want to take this to the next level, there's one more lesson from the teams that most people never hear. It's the difference between ordinary discipline and unbreakable resilience. And it's something I'll break down in the next video.